Hey, how's it going, everybody? So I wanted to take a moment to further talk about the not-for-profit government model and those stages leading from tyranny to liberty. I think there was a lot of people who are engaged with this and asking questions, and so I thought it was worth further explaining what the next steps are even after that initial model of turning the government into a not-for-profit, which means that they are no longer taxing, they have to raise all their funds voluntarily. And at the same time, they must also have open records and everything, out in the open for people to observe and check out, much like a not-for-profit. And that way, there's a next layer, next level of transparency so that people can actually make more informed decisions. Of course, as I said before, an individual person is not going to be able to know everything, but through the collective readings by different people and observations by different groups, things get brought to light, shared, and disseminated through different media communication channels, much like anything else with any type of journalism, so on and so forth, where things are discovered that are important and shared through larger outlets where people can learn about them. So the next steps in the not-for-profit government model, as far as moving from tyranny to liberty that I've outlined, and a little bit of this is pulled from my article, is that the ability for people to give to the government is actually broken up into major outlets where people can decide where their monies go. I did talk about a little bit about this on the last video, but just to be extra clear, the idea there is not that someone can earmark something for something really, really narrow, like, oh, I'll give to the justice system, but not for rape cases. It's not supposed to be that level, but just generally, like, here is money that goes to defense. Here is money that goes, toward maybe something with infrastructure. A giant label where the money is going to, that the government then can see, okay, where are people really valuing what it is that they want. So the idea there is, again, trying to look to see how you can break down the major parts of government functions into areas or arenas where people can donate so that it's very clear what people are valuing. And that can include, again, things like justice system, national defense, those kinds of things, those kinds of categories to be broken up into so that people can actually earmark. And I would imagine that that could lead to maybe 10 to 20 possible major earmarks where people could, have a form, whether it was digital or written, where they can check, here's where I'm giving these monies to. That would be a way to also help see, okay, what are people really valuing? And that's the move toward market measures to help actually both the public at large understand what people are valuing, and as well as those who are operating within the confines of government to understand, people are really caring about this issue, or people are really caring about, how we take care of this certain thing, or people are really responding to how we talk about something, how something is mentioned and told about to the public. That can definitely give insight into what people are actually caring about and what they want to hear is being done. And again, I'm not talking about that from in terms of manipulation, but rather in terms of communication of what actions are taking place in terms of government action to remedy certain situations in the traditional functions that it may have had, whether that's national defense, justice systems, infrastructure, so on and so forth. People tend to respond positively when they're being provided value, and that's the idea is to find where the value is, to start to move things toward market measures, and to have clearer signals for prices, both through the government and then, of course, leading to possibly through the private sector, where the government is not doing a great job. And as you can imagine, one of those chief ones we think about is like the post office, where that's one of those things where people, I think, clearly could do something differently or better. And there's already examples of that across the world and even within the U.S. So leading on to internal actions now, this is a little bit more new stuff. Internal actions of the government and moving toward true freedom. I would say that the U.S. government would need to begin in the next big stage ending victimless crimes. That would be the next big part of moving from tyranny to liberty. And for those who aren't familiar, victimless crimes just means that there is a type of legal harm where there isn't a human being at the end of that crime. So, for example, something that's very common and is rapidly changing, thanks to popular opinion, would be, the legalization of marijuana, and that's happened, medically or recreationally. There isn't a specific individual who is a victim of that. There isn't, a robbery going on where someone's, being taken from. There isn't someone who's being battered, who's being hit or hurt. There's an individual, and, let's just say they're wanting to have it in their house for whatever reason, medical or otherwise. There isn't a specific other victim that is being I guess you could say, seen to have been harmed in this situation, like you would with traditional crimes with theft or battery or, even possibly some forms of assault. So ending those types of crimes would be the next big step. Because by removing anything that's just, a status crime that relates to a state harm, this is an action that is against the state's rules, as opposed to, hey, there's actually a human being harmed by this person, outside of themselves, of course. That would be a really incredible way to move from tyranny to liberty, because now people are not being threatened with force for doing things which have no actual other person being harmed at the end of that action. I think that would be the next big step. It would be, after turning government to not-for-profit models, ending then victimless crimes, and that would seriously change the landscape of people's ideas about what could be done with peace, because now there isn't this philosophy being instilled on people through law saying that, oh, it's okay to initiate violence against somebody for their actions that don't have another type of victim. Again, the government's laws are fostering a type of backwards philosophy on people, because people are saying, oh, well, the government means, saying that this is illegal, so therefore that's our morality. And that is not how things ought to be if you want to have people who are thinking rationally about how their actions are affecting others, and thinking about the causes and effects and the costs to others in an empathetic way, as far as developing a core foundation philosophy that has a reciprocity of respect of autonomy, that is individual freedom, as well as the respect of others' property, including their own bodies. If you want to create a philosophy that is based on those foundational principles and that upholds those principles of mutual respect, it's hard to do that when you have a government that instills its morality, its ethical systems, saying that, well, if we don't like what you're doing, even though there's no victim, we can initiate force on you. We can come and send, armed thugs and beat you up and throw you in a cage. That is instilling a type of backward philosophy into people, because it's saying, well, if I just don't like what you are doing, that justifies me initiating force against you. Not that there's actually somebody else being physically harmed by somebody else. And so that's a part of this dichotomy of having space-age technology and stone-age philosophy. So again, now we have government not-for-profit model. We have the ability to people to earmark to specific departments. We end victimless crimes, and that is a next big step. After that, I would say the next big step in the not-for-profit government model is the beginning of the dismantling of major wasteful expenditures by the government and territories. What should happen, and some people might disagree with me on this, that's fine. I think personally that there should be a historical revisit to the foundations of the nation, and looking back there and forward, and there should begin to be a remedying of many types of harms of the past, those who were taken from by the government, whether it was eminent domain, even Native Americans, even types of reparations toward those who were hurt by the government, whether that was through genocide or even slavery. I think that there is room for those types of things to be remedied to some extent. It's obviously not going to be perfect. You're not going to be able to help or fix everybody. There's tons of people who are dead. There's tons of people who have been hurt, and they can't find the lineage. But I think that would be a wise step to begin to remedy some of those past harms. And how that would be done, I think most justly, would be through land grants. The idea is that starting to let go of certain parts of territories and helping to, I guess you could say, kind of fix some of those past harms of thefts and murders by helping some of what would be the future generations of those people. Again, it's not a perfect thing, and everyone, you could say, in the U.S. has been harmed at some level through the use of force and taxation. But I think that those who could be most directly seen as having been harmed by the U.S. government, and there's plenty of peoples, especially when it comes to those who were living here, native-wise, who have been moved or hurt otherwise, to get some form of remedies in that realm. I also think that those aren't the only people who should be remedied. I think that those who can even in recent times be shown to have been harmed through threats of force for either victimless crimes, or taxation issues should be brought some remedy of sorts, and that could be through what I would eventually see as the selling off of government functions that are just not really providing any purpose anymore, not things that are not needed toward, as it's trending toward a night watchman state. That is, the government is largely fulfilling its functions of defense and somewhat of justice, as I would imagine would happen as the market starts to pick up. I think those elements are likely going to be the last vestiges of government as things start to get picked up in the market, based on what I think you could see globally. I think those types of things will probably be the last things to go as the market develops. Anything that's like a traditional market function in terms of buying and selling goods and services, I think will get picked up first. Things that might deal with security, things that might deal with the justice system, I think will take a little bit longer for people to kind of figure out and kind of move away from. And so in the interim, things like education even will become vestiges of the past government. And so those departments, those buildings that they had, even some stuff with military equipment, as the U.S. starts to de-escalate forces from around the world and starts to move back. That's another part of the not-for-profit government solution, is starting to move out from having all of these bases from across the globe. Starting to, instead of having an interventionist policy, starts to bring people home, starts to get rid of that equipment. They can sell it back to the U.S. I think that would be a very important step, and those funds or those resources that are gained from starting to liquidate those assets can be returned to as a measure of remedying some harms from those who were hurt in the past by the government. Again, not perfect. No one's going to ever be made whole where their lives have been ruined. There's been murders and things like that. But I think it is realistic and reasonable that some of those types of harms could be somewhat remedied, especially those who had their either land taken, thinking eminent domain, those who were murdered, types of genocide, those who maybe were thrown in prison for something related to victimless crimes or tax issues. Those types of people, I think, could be somewhat remedied in a modern legal sense of monetary or resource compensation. Again, the idea is to try to start to fix these things piece by piece as the government slowly starts to lose piece by piece to the market taking over those functions, leading toward eventually what would probably be a night watchman level of state as things start to progress forward. Night watchman meaning that the government's really starting to only lead down to providing those core things of national security, some infrastructure as far as roads and things like that, national defense kinds of things. I think those things would be the last things to be taken over by the market. And as those things start to progress, as those things start to go and come together, I think that you're going to see the government start to really just mold itself into something that is a lot more efficient with people's, I guess you could say, time and resources, because if people are saying this is really not working, again, they're not going to want to fund those elements. And anything that can be picked up in the private market that can be done more efficiently or effectively is going to start to emerge as people start to shift their funds of what they value the most. And so, as I was saying, finally, one last thought here. This is not taking it all the way to the end, but one last thought here that I kind of touched on was that whole de-escalation of militarization around the world. That is also another big step in the not-for-profit government model, moving toward liberty from tyranny, and that is that the national defense should be focused around protecting the actual people and country, and not going and invading and trying to play politics all around the world, and doing economic disruptions and secret murders and things like that for trying to pin off people around the globe for creating special types of form conflicts, and trying to play puppet master of everything. The government should, in line with this thinking, begin to move back into a protection policy that really just relates to actually doing national defense, and not try to manipulate or change everything around the world. Stop butting into everybody else's lives and business. Stop drone bombing everything and things like that. And as there's a scaling back of those things, really focusing on defense at home against any foreign threats that might be still looming, while also starting to sell off and reduce supplies of things that were used for what was a more global expansion. Again, getting rid of those things, selling off those things, turning those resources or converting those resources into something else that's usable to, again, remedy other past harms or possibly pay off even debts. Again, another big part of this is the government should also, as it's selling off some of these assets, pay off some of these debts. And then I won't get into this part yet, but obviously the Federal Reserve, is something that would eventually have to go to allow money to arise, and I think that would actually just happen as part of the demonopolization part of the not-for-profit. Again, government's acting as not-for-profit demonopolizes, so that means people can now use other types of currency. So I think the Fed might actually just be erased through that process, where people switch to something that has been a more traditional sound money form, and with markets, people putting together a type of trade with money that would work a little better. But that could be its own huge topic. But eventually the Fed would be going through market mechanisms, and that would likely just happen, I think, organically. I think people would eventually want to switch to something that's just not paper, especially if they're no longer being forced to use that, and no longer being forced to pay taxes, and to have to use that medium in order to pay taxes. So I know there's a lot that I discussed here and all these different things, but again, the not-for-profit government model, starts off again with government turning to a 501c3 style business, pure transparency, no forced taxation. People can earmark to specific bubbles of areas of departments. Again, not specifically like, oh, no rape cases, because obviously that would be very hard to manage and kind of enact, but major areas, so we can start to see where things are going. We start to end the victimless crimes, start to remedy past harms, especially as relates to harms from victimless crimes or from anything that was related with taxation or any historical genocides. Started to de-escalate military stuff around the world, bringing those things back in, started to sell those off, pay back debts, and also, of course, remedy any past harms. And then eventually, here allowing the markets to dictate and help remove some of those other functions that are not really a core of what people want, things that people really don't value. And I think you'd eventually see a trend, most likely based on how people tend to vote and how people tend to respond to government functions. You would probably see a trend of those monies just leading toward a night watchman level state. People really just funding those kind of core functions of government with national security and some infrastructure, things like that. I think you'd find that would be what people would support. And that would go, again, all these things would happen from the top all the way down. So not-for-profit model applies federal level, state level, local level, or county level, whatever you'd like to say, municipality level. All of those levels should be moving to that mode of the not-for-profit model. So those are all steps here as to how that would happen, as to how that would de-escalate over time. And again, the importance of why I announce it this way is because voluntarism is a philosophical adoption. It is something that is meant to be taken as a mindset first, because people need to move away from statism, which justifies the initiation of violence as a means to an end. And through that model of allowing people to voluntarily cooperate through the markets and the idea that victimless crimes are okay, there's going to be a an ethical evolution that occurs alongside this market revolution with the government. So that's very important. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll talk to y'all later.